Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of Rivals in the world of Gran Turismo. This is one of the biggest series we've ever done in terms of the amount of episodes, one of the longest running series as well. It's a couple of years that we've been doing it now. Now this particular one is kind of a follow-up to a couple of months back now. We did a showdown, of course, between the newer versions of these cars in effect, the newer NSX, the newer GTR, although still an R35, and of course a completely different Lexus. The newer ones, the three newer Super GTs that came out first, we tested them around Suzuka. Now we're moving to another new track, Catalunya, with these three vehicles. Now, if you're new to the channel and you've clicked on this video and you haven't seen any of my other stuff, I've done tune setups and individual in-depth reviews for all three of these cars. So if you want to check out in a more in-depth sense what I really think of all three of them independently, and also how to tune each of them to make them better around corners, very easy to drive, then you should check those out. However, for this occasion, we're going to use a similar method to last time in Rivals with the Porsche Showdown, and that is that we're going to tune the cars differently based on the part of the video. Now for the lap times, I'm actually leaving the power and the weight on 100, so completely unmodified, just what they are straight out of the box. And of course, the reason why I'm doing that is because balance of performance can change anything at any time. So we're just leaving it stock to make it a fair game. However, for the points later on, I've fully upgraded all three cars because of course the point side of things is more so to show you what the cars are capable of when you fully tune them. So first of all, we'll break down each car individually and then we'll see how they stack up. First of all then, we have the Nissan GTR. Now I would say that each of these three cars has like one defining sentence that you could say about it in effect, and for me the defining sentence about the GTR is that it's the most consistent of the three. Now the most consistent does not mean it's the fastest. The Honda, spoiler alert, was the fastest of the three in terms of its pure lap time, both here at Catalunya and also when I tuned all three of them at Dragon Trail. On both occasions, the Honda was the quickest. So that speaks for itself. It's 2 for 2 in my experience, and of course, the tuning, the driver, the track, etc., that can change everything depending on who will win and the kind of lap times that you can get. But with the fairly equal playing field of the same track, the same level of upgrade, and me as the same driver, it still allows you to have some idea at least of how the cars compare. Now the reason why I say that the Nissan is more consistent is because, yes, strictly, factually, semantically speaking, the Honda is quicker. Certainly. Like half a second quicker here, about a second quicker on Dragon Trail. However, you have to focus a lot more to get the Honda to do that, and it's much more prone to fighting back and biting back than the Nissan is. The Nissan is definitely the car that I would recommend, especially to those who aren't super seasoned drivers. Not necessarily absolute beginners, but not just ultimate pros, let's say, because the Nissan can run much more similar lap times lap after lap without making anywhere near as many mistakes and also being much less taxing on you as the driver. What then about the Honda? Well, we kind of touched on the Honda just now when I was talking about the Nissan, and in many ways those things carry over. Strictly speaking, it is the quickest of the three, and that is something which should not be discounted. It is the fastest of the three, and of course you want to bear that in mind because the whole point of racing is, of course, to win. So if you are a pro, or if you just want more of a challenge, you can discount the fact that it is more difficult to drive, and to say it's difficult is kind of an overstatement. It's not awful, but it's more challenging, let's say, than the other two. But the payoff is that it is that much faster, and of course half a second per lap makes a huge difference over the course of a race, and that's against myself, so equal driver ability. Imagine if you then exaggerate that against people who aren't the same as you, people who maybe aren't as good, or maybe people who are a little bit better. Those kind of lap time differences can make the difference between a win and a loss. In terms of how it actually drives though, my single sentence about the Honda would be quite simply, it's the fastest of the three. It's as simple as that. Regardless of it being challenging or not, it is the quickest of the three in my experience, and it's at least alongside the GTR, if not alone, in terms of actually even coming close to stuff like the newer ones with balance of performance applied. So what then finally about the Lexus, kind of the black sheep, if you will, the one that many people don't like the standard car, many people have been heavily influenced by Clarkson's opinions of the road car, which kind of rubs off on the race car. Surely it can't be that good either. Well, let's take a look at it and find out. To me, it's unfortunate, the opinion that many people have about the Lexus, because it's simply not a bad car. In fact, to put it into some kind of perspective, this Lexus was the slowest of these three vehicles, and yet my lap time here without any power or weight upgrades at all was still 2 seconds quicker than my Zonda R. That is not bad. I mean, say what you will about this car out of the three, but do not call it a bad car, because that is quick. The Zonda R is not a slow machine, and that was on racing tyres as well. So this destroyed the Zonda R, and it was still within a very close time of the other two. In fact, it's just over a second behind, for instance, the Honda, which was the quickest of the three. So slow it is not. However, amongst a group of pros, it will tend to be the one that will probably lose. You won't necessarily lose by much, depending on the opposition and the track, but you'll probably lose. So my single sentence about the Lexus is that it's easily underestimated, sometimes for good reason. Is it the best of the three in any particular way? Well, we'll find out in a second when we look at the specs. But in practice, no, not necessarily. However, I would recommend it to people who want something that is forgiving for the most part, especially if you apply my tuning, which I'm using here. But it's simply put not the quickest of the three. Is it a bad car though? No, not at all. It may be the slowest of these three, but that's like saying that something's the slowest of Formula 1 cars. It could still wipe the floor with most other things. And that's the kind of opinion that you need to have about this one. Is it the less enticing one? Of course. Does that make it bad? Most definitely not. So we've taken a look at all three cars, we've looked at the lap times. What then about the actual points? Well, let's find out. Now, as I said earlier, for the purpose of giving the cars actual points, and also to show those of you who haven't bought all three of them yet what they can do when you do choose to fully upgrade them, or when balance of performance is applied, that kind of stuff, the kind of range, in other words, that the cars have, we have fully tuned them. And you can see here from the numbers that we have very heavily tuned them. So how do they compare? Well, in a couple of obvious ways, they're the same. So, for instance, with price and clash, you could choose to give none of them a point because they're equal. In my case, I'm more generous, so let's give them all a point. So they're all 800,000 credits, surprise, surprise, so give them all a point there. Of course, they all have the same class distinction. There's no advantages there, they're all Group 2, so once again, let's give them all another point. It's looking pretty good for the Lexus so far because it's on equal footing. What then about the engine? Well, of course, this is always a point of contention that the biggest engine is not always the best. In fact, it's often not the best. But these are top trumps rules. And this is, at the end of the day, just for the fun of it. So, of course, we will give the biggest engine the point because that's the way top trumps works. So, on this occasion, it's the GTR. Although, the funny thing is, it's actually not the biggest by much. It's a 4.5 litre, but so is the Lexus. It's only, what, 14cc smaller, which is pretty much nothing in comparison. And then you've got way back at a 3.5 litre, the Honda. However, just to highlight what I said about that not really meaning very much, for both power and torque, the Honda is the best of the three. In fact, for torque, it's got a huge margin of advantage, which is kind of ironic. Hondas aren't exactly known for their torque, and GTRs kind of are. So to completely swap those roles is, well, as I said, kind of ironic. Now, as far as power, it's not much that separates them. 788 for the Lexus is again still trailing behind, but not by much. 789, just 1 horsepower more for the Nissan, and then another 2 horsepower more at 791 for the Honda. So not that far between them. For torque, though, as I said, totally different, and ironically the Nissan is the least torquey of the three, just over 600 pound-feet, whereas the Honda way up over 670, which isn't necessarily ideal given its handling, and it's one of the reasons why it has that tendency to be a bit slippery as well, because it has more torque most of the time, even without tuning it as heavily as this. As far as weight, interestingly, this is a way in which the Lexus actually regains a point over something like the Honda, because the Honda is the heavier of the three cars, whereas the Nissan and the Lexus are, interestingly, exactly the same. 891 kilos, cutting the Honda by 6 kilos against it. And finally, as far as the horsepower per ton, funnily enough, despite the fact that it's equal to the Lexus with weight and not the most powerful of the three, it's actually the Nissan, because it's got good enough power and good enough weight to average it out overall to get 886 horsepower per ton, which is just 2 more than the Lexus, and get this, is 2 more from the Lexus to the Honda. So a full 4 horsepower lower, the Honda that is, compared to the Nissan. So kind of ironic that the Honda is so much more powerful, so much more torquey, and yet the weight, or the horsepower per ton I should say, because of the weight, is lower. So how does that fall? Well, in terms of lap time, the Lexus did a 142.8, the Nissan did a 142.0, and the Honda did a 141.6. So not a huge amount of difference, but that is pretty much the way that you'd expect it to go. And in terms of points, we actually have a pretty nice sliding scale for this one, because coming in third, probably surprising nobody, is the Lexus with 3 points, and those are price, category, and interestingly weight, where it's equal with the Nissan. Then we have the NSX with 4 points, 1 point more, with again price, class, power, and torque. And interestingly, our winner is the GTR, because once again you have the price and the class, but also the biggest engine. It's co-lightest with the Lexus, and the clincher is that horsepower per ton. So an interesting outcome, if you will, because the Lexus lost on paper and it lost in terms of lap time, so no surprise there. But then it goes back and forth between the Nissan and the Honda. They're both brilliant. The Honda has the edge on the track, the Nissan has the edge on paper, but as I said earlier, the two that I'd recommend the most are definitely, and I'm sorry Lexus, the Honda and the Nissan. The Honda if you just want to be the absolute fastest, the Nissan if you want to have a slightly easier time and give up maybe 0.3 or 0.4 of a second per lap to have an easier, less taxing, less stressful race. So it's down to you. All 3 cars are brilliant, and overall that's it for this matchup. So of course, as I said, check out all of the other videos that I've done for these cars if you haven't already, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.